Bum 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 bum. Am I on? I might be on. I might not. I'm still at Studio B today. Sorry, I got. Sometimes I get carried away between work and family. I kind of just let myself go a little bit. This is the last day of the family visit. The last full day I will be at Studio B for the time being. I'll be heading back to the city tomorrow at some point. Might try to stream. Don't know. Um, I don't know if I would say I'm out of sorts a little bit. There was some good feedback on that kind of fighter concept. Daniel from Bandits Keep chimed in a couple of comments. Some other people had some good comments. I mean, I think something like that system, it's always gonna be something that will have different utility to different people if they like it at all. And it. I think the great thing is you tweak them to suit your systems, to suit your table. How do you like to play the game? Figure that out, and then go. So, but it was interesting to see other people's thoughts. Daniel said he likes the charisma coming into play there. I mean, I just tend to be more on the line of, well, one, it doesn't really bother me. If you want charisma to be there, certainly that's fine. At the same time, I think it's fine to not have everything be. And I kind of like, I guess ultimately, I really like class kind of based advancement. And I like the concept that your attributes, good or bad, have sort of limited purview. And part of me at least thinks, and this is all theory crafting, right? Part of me thinks that with this kind of retainer stuff, we're going to have sort of specialized retainers. And this is what we're talking about. If I started talking about this stuff and you're wondering, what the heck is he talking about? Fighters, retainers. I guess it was on Saturday, I streamed looking at this idea of giving fighters specialized retainers. My thinking being, and this is probably something that really, I'm currently playing a fighter, so I'm sort of feeling it a little bit. But really, this could apply to any non-magic using class. And the problem that I'm looking at, problem in quotes, is that at a certain point, the problems in the game, the challenges in the game, become very magic. They become magic oriented. It's kind of impossible. I would be hard pressed to think about how they wouldn't be at some point. Hey, Frederick, thanks. I did have a good Father's Day. Hey, here's a homebrew. Says, how about defining the line between NSR and OSR? Man, let me finish this thought, and then we could talk about that, I suppose. This idea of when you reach a certain level, the problems that you tend to face, and now in Daniel's game, the game I'm playing a fighter in, we're like 6, 7, 8, something like I'm 6th level. There's a couple, maybe 1 or 2 other 7th levels. I think there's at least 1 8th level. So the threats we're dealing with, the situations we're dealing with, end up being of a fantastical nature. And once you get in that kind of fantastical nature, the mundane solutions that my fighter could actually do in the game kind of melt away. We got to stop the Balrog from getting through the door. Piling up some stuff in front of the door maybe would help a little bit. Probably not going to help. I think of the Balrog in Lord of the Rings. You need that Gandalf there to almost get destroyed by dealing with the spell and counterspell. He's trying to wizard lock the spell. The Balrog's trying to counterspell, and it's a neat moment in the book. Oh, all right, that's something my fighter can't do. There's no way around. I mean, yes, on the off chance I could have a weapon. Oh yeah, maybe I have a weapon that does it, but can't do it. So that's the kind of problem I was trying to solve, and I think it doesn't just apply to fighters. It's just fighters is what on my mind. But there's probably some neat ways to do it, and I'll have to look more at the retainer system as it is, and maybe it will necessitate a look at the retainer system as a whole. On the kind of prescriptive nature that I was talking about, because I was saying basically like they should get kind of some of this, some of that, some of the other one. It's kind of funny because the books also have some kind of prescriptive nature, right? At level 9, you're going to get so many men at arms and so many soldiers and so many whatever. I'm just kind of flipping it a little bit, but I'm not averse to freeing it up or making it different. I think, and especially at low levels, doesn't really matter so much. But remember, just keeping in mind when we're talking about this, the problem I'm trying to solve is the high level kind of some, either if we're not going to give them magic, then kind of some way, and it's not about the power level of it. Like It's just more that you become kind of an advisor. It's not that it's the power. It's just you just don't have the equipment. And to me, it's not about combat either. This isn't about, the fighter, the wizard cast fireball. What can I do? Like, I don't even, especially depending on the version of the game and what you're allowed to do in melee and in combat, some of those choices kind of get constrained anyway. And I don't even necessarily think the fighter's in a bad place. Though I think they could use some buffing like folks have done with kind of BX-based fighters and all that. But it's that kind of outside the combat stuff. In terms of Frederick's point about NSR and OSR, that's a tricky one. Frederick says, fighters at higher level need that big army to stay relevant. They have magic and you have numbers. Yes, and I mean, yes, you're right. They have that large army. But like I said, the problem that doesn't address. So saying, well, you have an army. Sure. And if we were going into the domain game portion of the program, if we were interfacing with domains, then that would certainly be true. But the problem is we're not. And it's not a problem. We've just chosen as a group, we're not ready to start investing in domains yet. So I don't have an army. I don't have anywhere to take an army. We're not in army locations. We're in a dungeon. We're trying to be kind of stealthy, so army doesn't apply. They're just... And I think if we were doing the army thing, then I would imagine maybe you get magic users as part of your domain forces. I don't know. But I think that maybe is an issue or something needs to be addressed or thought about, is that kind of, well, if you're not going to domain play, and lots of folks aren't, then this idea of the fighter and their army, you don't have the army because you're not out on the plains doing battle in those large numbers. You're off. Maybe you're plane hopping. Maybe you're just going into the deeper and deeper to mega dungeons. And if you want to make the argument of, well, bring your army to the mega dungeon and do it that way, I suppose. But a lot of games aren't, that's not kind of how they're usually played. And sometimes it's not even appropriate. Or we don't even have the means to bring in the army to where we are to do all that. That's just things that we're not doing right now. So, sure. If we were playing the domain game, yeah, your army may come into play. But I still think there's that point where having that big army may not even be that useful. I think it's something to think about, right? And what I thought about was, well, Arthurs have their Merlins, Conans have their, I'm a wizard, mind you guys, follow them around. Here's what Homer says, check out Medieval Mercenaries by Brian Larkin. Oh, I'll check it out. Hey, Mythic Mountains, how are you? I'll check it out. So basically, I'm kind of, outside of that kind of feedback thing, I don't really have much to... I was really kind of hoping that some folks would show up, so I'm glad folks have showed up. And I'm kind of just doing this kind of open table style. What do you guys want to talk about? I did find a couple of articles. Just with the family and stuff, we've been playing a lot of board games and doing things like that, so I haven't really had my brain in role-playing games and that kind of stuff for the last few days. And the party ends tonight, and then we're all kind of going back to Parts Unknown tomorrow. So, I'm just kind of hanging out. Why not more sci-fi? I love sci-fi. I've always loved sci-fi. Oh, in the OSR label. Well, isn't there some? I mean, what does Mothership? I mean, are people don't say? I mean, I don't know. People like the Worlds Without Numbers, right? The Stars Without Numbers, Mothership. There's got to be some other ones, right? I mean, hopefully people in the OSR. This is something I guess I should point out, or I've seen generally, which I think I mentioned this in something else, but whatever. I found some of the OSR folks of late, at least in some places, acting kind of curmudgeonly about the OSR label, again, or trying to be kind of gatekeepery. I don't understand it. Thankfully, I don't think I've seen anything where people have said, "Oh, it's not fantasy, so it can't be OSR." I don't know. I mean, people have their different definitions of OSR, right? And I think the people who are holding to it's got to be compatible with a certain version of D&D before a certain date, that kind of will naturally constrain what would be considered OSR if you're going by that kind of strict definition. I don't really go by that strict definition, but certainly some people do, I suppose. All right, so Mythic Mountain says, for example, they can find only 2 space western zines or dungeons that are popular OSR. So we have Tomb Robbers of the Crystal Frontier and Desert Moon of Karth. There's Mutant Crawl Classics, right? So DCC is another one of those things that you could probably say, is it or isn't it OSR? I think you get some whatever. But yeah, there's Mutant Crawl Classics. Though I haven't played it. I backed it for the digital copy way back when, and I think when that first version came out, I think it was. I mean, and they admitted it was it was more of a work, or it just needed work in terms of the typos. There just seemed to be a lot, and I wasn't someone who went through and found all this stuff, but I just remember like I got it, and I was like, oh, this is gonna be cool, and then I started reading online, people kind of complaining or sort of picking it apart in terms of it just seemed to be riddled with a lot of, I don't know if errors is the right word, but just typos and whatnot. And I kind of just put it aside, like, okay, I'll come back to it when it's ready. And I never, I have not yet come back to it. Yeah, this is so Mythic Mountain says that Goodman has said that it isn't OSR, and I think some people would, yeah, I'm sure some people would say it isn't, but that kind of nitpicking just bugs me. Like I don't know. I mean, I guess that's why I kind of, I mean, I use the term OSR in titles and things like that because people still recognize it and use it, but to me, it's kind of no longer a useful distinction. And going back to Frederick's kind of NSR versus OSR. I mean, I think part of it was to try to get away. To me, the NSR was a couple things, or where the title came from, maybe what it means. One was just to kind of drop the idea that it had to be compatible with 1980s D&D. If that was, because that seemed to be some people's definition, right? If you can pull out Keep on the Borderlands or Isle of Dread or some other thing and the Lost City, and you can kind of play it and not have to do, and you can kind of run it without too much prep, or you can run it just and do the conversion easily, that's OSR. That's, I mean, in the beginning, that would be probably, in the beginning of the OSR, that probably would have been more or less correct. Whatever. But I think that the NSR was a way to say, like, okay, we don't want to, if when you get embroiled with the OSR people, hey Magnus, that becomes kind of a big issue and whatever. Well, then one way to just sidestep that whole issue, say, okay, we're not going to call ourselves OSR, we're NSR, and we don't care so much about this immediate compatibility, and because we're not trapping on old school and that whole thing, so we can just kind of sidestep it. I think that's part of it. And frankly, I think the other thing is that the OSR, the voices in the OSR are, especially the more popular ones, are fairly divisive, and they can be off-putting to some. And this gets people defensive all the time. And I wish it wouldn't, but it does. And I'll be prepared for statements, oh, everyone's their own, da-da-da, there's no, yeah, and you're right, there is no authority. It's the kind of the Wild West. Everyone can put up their, set up shop in a shanty town of their own making and whatever. That's fine. But I think that doesn't really sidestep the fact that there are, depending on where you're coming from and your values and all that there's some folks, and I'm sure on both sides, like, hey, like, whoa, and it's put off. And I think it's in some circles and amongst some people, I think just the fact that something is OSR is it's a put off. To them, it reads to them as being kind of the sort of the stereotypical bad side of the grognard kind of coin. All the bad stereotypical grognard qualities rolled up into a label. So don't associate yourself with that particular label. Okay, we got NSR, so we can do that. So that's kind of the two prongs, I think, of where the OSR came from. Nobody yet. I mean, yeah, one of the things, right? Nobody owns this stuff, and the reality is that when these labels usually come up, is they're done after the fact, where things look a lot cleaner with distance. I don't think people in the Renaissance were going, we're in the Renaissance. No, they're living, and they were probably doing whatever. It's just that historically you look back at it and you go, interesting, we could take this 100 or whatever many years it was, 200 years or whatever, 100 and whatever years, and say, oh, okay, look at these trends. And okay, we can kind of package these trends into an era. We can call this era the Renaissance, right? That was it. Like, film noir is one I like to bring up because I kind of know that one a bit. Film noir was a phrase used to describe a bunch of movies made in I guess, really the 40s and 50s. And time frames for film noir vary slightly, but you get 40s to 50s, but not all American movies, certain movies. But it was coined by French, not filmographers, but basically students of French cinemaphiles who saw these bunches of movies and started to kind of be able to catalog them and say, oh, interesting, they have all these things in common. Check mark, check mark, check mark, check mark. And then that's why it's film noir and not black film or something like that, or dark film or whatever. It's film noir. Why? Because they figured it out. But they did it all after the period is basically over. They were to look back at it and say, oh, interesting. With this kind of OSR stuff, as we're doing it and we're still kind of in it. Or maybe I would probably argue we're in a post-OSR world, but whatever. 10, 20 years, they'll probably look back at it and say, like, okay, now we can mark these are the real kind of OSR times. And all this is later. And maybe John Peterson, if he's still around, can write a whole book about it. But, that's beyond my scope. All right, there's a bunch of comments here. Let me go see. Hey, Mark. Mark says one AD&D rules. I don't dispute that. As much as I default to BX, I do love BX. I like the white box a lot, but AD&D is right up there. I think and that sort of child. I mean, it's interesting because there's a kind of a generation of us, gamers. And this is just kind of old coffee for the working man. Old, slightly cold coffee for the working man. Who grew up on kind of a hodgepodge. Like if I'm being real, I don't know that I ever played, or maybe just briefly when I was a kid, just BX on its own. Probably did. Probably some games where I just had those boxes and played. But almost as early as I remember having those games, also had the AD&D books, Monster Manual, Player's Handbook, and, the DMG. And gaming, it was just a hodgepodge. We were just, take this, take that. Oh, we keep on the Borderlands. Oh, we got this stuff. And it just all, look at that, Fiend Folio. Just everything's just getting munged together. And I couldn't tell you, out of that melange, out of that soup, out of that, stew that we played, what percentage was BX, what percentage was AD&D. And of course we didn't care. It was not important to us. It was like, you just kind of keep adding things in there. And it's funny that I think I always just thought about something individually just happened in my life, but it seems like there's a whole bunch of us for whom that was the game. Some kind of weird thing about just, hey, whatever we could kind of grab and throw in the table came. So even though as an adult I've gravitated more to BX slightly than to AD&D, it still has a great place in my heart because I would, all those books were kind of a piece. Back as a kid, there was really no distinction in our playing between basic and AD&D. Now, I think if we'd been slightly older, I know the slightly older kid experience was that you just kind of drop basic for advanced, of course, because you're, why do I want to play the basic stuff when we got advanced D&D? But for us, that part didn't really enter into it. So we just kind of threw it all together. Let's see what else is going on here. Dustin says, for open table and you're running a 1-to-1 time, do I have the escaping the dungeon table? Do I make exceptions if players can schedule another game immediately? Is being so rigid beneficial or fun? Oh, that's a good question. Okay, so let me, and apologies if I miss anything. I'll try to get stuff. So I have not played with 1-to-1 time. I've never played in a situation where I felt it's necessary. I will concede that there are certainly in certain situations, and I don't even say concede. There's nothing wrong with it. I'm not anti 1-to-1 time if you want to do that. If you're playing with a single group, all your players, and you're kind of playing at once, I don't think there's a need to do the 1-to-1 time. To me, the 1-to-1 time, the whole idea of it is playing in that gaming club atmosphere, or West, if we were going to say now, kind of a West Marches game. One world, potentially maybe the only dungeon that's known maybe at the time, and you have multiple parties moving around, and you need to manage where all these parties are. I think that is important. Maybe it's important. Like, you could play without caring about that stuff. I mean, let's be honest, right? And at a certain level, if you ran everybody through the same dungeon and it just was magically repopulated anytime any party went in there, and maybe you roll your treasure randomly, it wouldn't be that big a deal. It's just, it would be a certain, right, for a beer and pretzels game, as I like to say, no one would care, right? Who would care? Maybe someone goes, oh man, we beat this lich on level 3 of the dungeon, or whatever. Maybe not a lich on level 3, but you get my idea. Oh, there was a mummy on level 3 of the dungeon. Oh, yeah, we beat that same mummy. So you might go like, okay, well, we're all trying to play this. We want to play in the fiction idea that it's one shared dynamic world. So, okay, maybe we got to switch it up. But really, that's where your one-to-one time comes in to do those sorts of things, because it forces the parties to be at different areas. They can't all be at the dungeon at the same time. So if one party is in the one dungeon, you're doing one-to-one time. Then even if you schedule something on the next day, you're kind of going in transit. And the idea of being kind of ending back in town also means that you're moving and moving. And I know they even had a rule. I don't know if it's in which version of it's in. If it's in AD&D, I think it's definitely in the white box. But they kind of assume it takes you basically a week to get to town, or some amount of days to get back to town. So you kind of add these things together. Maybe one-to-one times kind of was replaced that idea of the 5 days to 6-7 days to whatever it is to town. But the idea is it's keeping all these things out. If you're going to have people end back in town for the kind of West March thing, then I think you have to have the escaping the dungeon table. And the reason why I think you have to have it is there needs to be. So part of the whole West March's dealio, right, is you're putting the onus to adventure on the party. And you're doing it on a macro level by they're doing all the scheduling, and right, you're the GM, and you're saying, hey, I'm available these days, and if you guys want to play, you tell me, right? So we're putting the onus on the players to get their act together, figure out what they want to do, and then come to you and say, hey, GM, you said you're available Thursday at 7. Well, we'd like to go here and do this thing on Thursday at 7. You as a GM go, great. And it takes a load off your shoulders and whatever. The other part of that is because the cast of characters can be changing from one game to the next. That's why ending up in some kind of common area is important, because you want to be able to swap things out with minimal issues. If you're all spreading out in 5 different towns, then either you just have to kind of hand wave away the fact that they meet up, which actually would probably work too, or you'd have to do something else. But in this case, saying, we're all starting in Bartertown, and then we'll explore the wilderness from Bartertown. But there's also kind of a micro version of this sort of timing element in there, and that is you need to budget your time and energy and resources to get back out of the dungeon and get back out to town. And because otherwise the players just delve as deep as they could, and then just go boink. All right, we're going to be back in town next week, yay! But having that table means that there's a real danger if they don't get themselves out. Maybe they don't have to get themselves all the way to town. I would probably say, hey, just get out of the dungeon. If you get out of the dungeon, maybe we'll roll, or maybe I'd roll on a back to town table, but it would probably, or maybe even not. I don't know. But you've got to put some pressure on them to also work themselves back out. And so that's why I think that table is importante. Mark asked, we're talking about West Marches. Yeah, kind of, sort of. So the question was about one-to-one time and the getting out of the dungeon table. So this would apply to the kind of AD&D sort of deal, but also West Marches, which was sort of based on that same thing. Hey, Brian Smith. Let's see, what other comments we have? So hopefully that answered it. I do like those getting out of the dungeon, and I think it encourages players to, it's always that thing of, as a player in these games, you tend to not want to let randomness in the door as much as you can. You want to be able to try to do everything you can to eliminate, or at least downplay randomness as much as you can. So having that table in there forces you to want to consider getting back out, which I always like that as a thing. I think some people think like, oh, it's so boring, we win it, why do we get out? I think it's nice because you never know what's going to hit you on the way back out. Sometimes resources are low and it's a real challenge to get back out. I think those are some of the times where some of the more fun things can happen, because now you're not at full strength, and you're not, we're ready to go. It's like, oh gosh, we got a bunch of loot on our back. We want to try to get to town, and I only got a handful of hit points left, and we got the bugbears on our tail. It's fun. It's fun. Here's a homer says that they would roll to escape the dungeon, but hand wave return to town. It seems unfair to punish them as they try to return at the end of the session. Yeah, I guess. I mean, I don't know if it's unfair, because that's the game. The game is you got to go through the wilderness to get to the place and get back again. And if you're not going to take the time to do it yourself, because remember, to be fair, on the hard-ass GM side of things, to be fair, that wilderness travel is probably like one roll of the dice. And, it's like if you're doing one, and like, I don't know what AD&D's is, but like, BXN, it's kind of one encounter a day, one encounter roll a day. Chances are it's pretty clear, which would, on the one hand, you say, well, then why not hand wave it? On the other side, it's like, well, that's kind of part, it's you could look at it in two ways. You look at it and say, that's kind of boring, and why am I just inserting blah, blah, blah? On the other hand, it's like, well, that's kind of part of the challenge and stuff. I'm not going to, either way, it's fine. I don't, it's not something I'm not going to die on that hill of, oh, you have to play out every, that hex crawly part. But again, it can be fun, and it also rewards players for taking the time, like literally like the gaming time, right? Taking that time saying, oh my gosh, we got 3 hours. So that means, oh, look, it's 45 minutes left or whatever, or an hour left, so we should be thinking about getting back out. Like, that's a good quality, I think, to develop. And also whatever preparation and things they can do. What can they do to mitigate those travel things? Maybe they set up a camp, or they have the way. Maybe if you're a higher level fighter and you've got your army, maybe you have your army escort you back. And if you had your army or something escort you back, then unless I rolled something crazy on an encounter table, that creature is not going to want to mess with an army, so they're moving on, right? So you can mitigate that stuff, and that's kind of part of what I think is kind of fun about sort of having an expedition, is being able to figure out that kind of logistics and trying to see how your plans hold up under pressure. Okay, what else have we got here? Let's see. Let's see. Whoa. All right, Mythic Mountains has stuff about John Peterson. Reading The Elusive Shift. Yeah, I haven't read that one yet. But he's saying that that's wild how divergent ideas were back in 75. Yeah, I can imagine. Let's see. What else? Brian Smith says that they've really grown to appreciate the return journeys being part of the whole fiction. Yeah, I mean, I think that's that kind of... All right, Lord of the Rings had that. I don't know if Lord of the Rings might have been one of the first ones to do it, because usually that idea of the return journey, that coming back, it's something that in it's I know, Joseph Campbell and that sort of what the hero's journey, talks about that, but in a lot of pulp stories, it was never really... I don't remember there being, usually like, I don't know, the tower is collapsing under the Stygian magic into the sea or into the sands or something, and the last thing you see is Conan riding off wildly on a stallion, maybe with the princess that was kidnapped kind of on the back of the horse, and they're riding off into the darkness, and that's it. You just assume at the beginning of the next story that that Conan made it back safe and sound, right? That's it. But in the kind of Lord of the Rings, when there's a good bit of book left when the hobbits, after the ring is destroyed, and you have Aragorn gets married, they got to deal, they go back to the Shire, Sauron, all that stuff. And yeah, I think there can be a lot of good things there. And yeah, I think that it often just kind of gets, I mean, part of it I think is in modern gaming is this idea of this forward progress, that you should always be on this forward progress, and you just miss a lot of things, or a lot of things you just end up just smoothing over because, why do you need to back out of the dungeon? We don't care about that. We just want to be on to the next thing. Why do we when you go back and deal with that? It's just on to the next thing. But sometimes the best stuff is when you actually have to go back. Magnus says, Conan's greatest plunder is always the maidens. Yeah, there happens to be usually a maiden there. Every once in a while he finds a little Guy Friday. Rune says that they think that the travel back has, unless the travel back has stakes or payoffs, then it's mostly just filler or how you design your game. I don't tend to think of it as filler. It's another risk. I think it's just those risks that you do. I don't think anything in the game is filler, and you never know what's going to come of them, right? I think if you look at these things as purely monster encounter combat, then that may be, but even then, those can be interesting because they might force the party to do things, and there's an act and react. They get pushed in directions that they weren't trying to go into, and that creates interesting decisions. If you've got all this loot, and now you look, and there are, I don't know, evil griffin riders that are catching up to you as you're riding across whatever, and you see that there's a copse of woods. You could try to break it across the plains, but the GM's saying you're just weighted down. You got too much loot. Maybe you got a wagon or something. You can't do it. Or you could try to cut over through that forest, try to lose them, or at least break their ability to see you clearly. Maybe there's something in that forest. Maybe they decide to bury the loot, and then they got to try to come back out and get it. Maybe somebody else finds the loot. Like, there's just so much stuff can happen from that. I don't really feel like any of these mechanics are just, it's filler. I mean, I think filler is how you treat it. If you treat all these things as something, and that's not even getting into, well, oh, they're evil Griffin riders. Where are they from? What are they doing? What do they want? It ceases to become some kind of random, oh, the GM's punishing us kind of thing, and it's another part of the world that you're building out. I've mentioned before how I rolled up some random lycanthropes, and they turned into a real kind of part of the world that I didn't even want lycanthropes in my game, but since I had failed to design my own tables, I was using BX's tables, so I came up with werewolves. And it ended up being a fun addition to the game. And it ended up not being a combat encounter either for the party. Just ended up putting some things in motion that had real things. But that was just a check. So I never want to overlook that stuff and say, oh, it's just filler. If you don't I would bet you if you as the GM don't treat it as filler and you try to find context that makes sense and kind of make it work, then it might not be filler. Let's see. What else we got here? Hey, Redcaps. Let's see. So Mythic Mountain says the best fairy quote unquote otherworld resources. They've got Rackham Vale, Gardens of Yin. What are other liminal fairy space OSR things like that? Man, I don't know. The things that that really would I would guess that, and I haven't read it yet, and I have no affiliation with them, so I don't really know anything about anything. But I feel like Dolmenwood at least. I mean, Dolmenwood seems to be getting that. Right, like if you want a fairy kind of thing, this is what you should get, right? If you want sort of a fairy tale kind of vibe. I don't know how much it goes into. I know there's, because right, isn't it not Hole in the Oak, Winter's Daughter, you actually kind of go into the fairyland a little bit so you get a taste of what that's like. I don't know if they detail it much beyond that, because I don't know much beyond that, but yeah, I don't know. I don't really know a good one. Runes, I think it's okay in terms of the going back to town, but then it makes the escape the town the climax, the dungeon itself the second act. I don't know. Well, I don't really see that in Rune. I actually don't care about that at all, right? I'm not plotting a movie. I'm playing a game. And there's going to be endless games. Like, I'm in the middle of some campaign. I do not care whether the party considers the dungeon escape the climax or the return to save the climax. It doesn't matter. Like, why do I care? I'm not trying to work in some kind of 3-act, 4-act, whatever you want to do, dramatic scenario. And I think it's a little bit, I mean, not just personally, I think it's a little bit of a mistake to look at. I know people like to look at sessions that way. It's the whole idea of the cinematic gaming. And if that's your thing, like, that's great. But I think that's actually often a mistake. I've never left a place going like, boy, we really are, like, I don't come out of, like, I play in Daniel's game on Thursday. I've never walked out of the game going, oh man, that second act we really didn't, that, our mid session high point or low point didn't really strike, or that like it doesn't. I'm not thinking about that stuff, right? And I don't want my party thinking in that way, and so I don't care if the escape ends up being bigger than the dungeon. Then great, hopefully the dungeon was good. Hopefully escaping the dungeon was dramatic, and it wasn't just like, okay, we just carry some loot bags at the entrance and go. But either way. Do not care. Hey, Fluffy, thank you. This is Studio B, where I actually have space to do things. Though, as you'll see, back at Studio A, I'll have a little bit of a different scenery. That's like a little tempt you for later scenes down the road. Brian Smith points out, as far as fairy stuff, Brian Froud's illustrations, or Froud. And oh yeah, I haven't read it yet. Redcast brings up the Neverland RPG. That probably would be a good one too. Mark says that we used to use wooden ships and Iron Man war game or board game as an extension of D&D, and they often wondered if some OSR rules for using other board games as subsystems for D&D would be fun. Well, I think you may. I don't know if you saw those streams or not, but I did look at Source of the Nile, which I think would have some interesting things just in terms of its mechanics of the dynamic kind of on the fly. Terrain generation and some neat things for traveling up river. I think those are the things I'll probably pull out of that are kind of interesting. It's a lot of the other stuff is just too much. The 19th century white European explorer theme, I think, is not something I'd want to pull over elements of that, but those exploration elements are good. I need to kind of dig back into that actually, but there's some good stuff there. All right, hold on. So Redcaps wants to know on the shelf. let's see, 3 rows down. 1. Am I doing this right? 2, 3. From the left, your left, my right. We kind of here. 1. No, you can't be asking about Lord of the Rings. I pray you know what that is. Or is it? Or are we going from this side? That's Castle Ravenloft, which I can't imagine. You're gonna have to help me here. Which one is it? Hold on, let me get on the chat. Red Caps. That's Dungeon Degenerates. Lord of the Rings, Shadows over Camelot, Mage Knight, the Midnight RPG book, which I think I looked at once, maybe briefly on screen, and then Grim. I think I looked at these both at the same time. Grim Tales, High Adventure, Low Magic. So are you looking at a board game or a book? Second column. Oh, sorry, the boxes. All right, sorry about that. Second column. I see. Hold on, let me go back up and find. Second column. All right, 3 rows down. Second column. Down here. Third item from the left. Shadowrun Crossfire, or are we talking Evolution Climate? Hold on. Evolution Climate, it's a game about evolution. Big Trouble in Little China game. And then Shadowrun Crossfire, which was a card game. Kind of a deck building, I guess you should say. Cooperative deck building card game. Out of print. Clearly not mint in the box. Out of print. Picked it up when I heard really good things about it. And it's very good, though. I haven't played it in a long time. If I get in front of you here, which obviously you can't see, is, I don't know how best to put this. Remnants. So, here's a little story time. It is all the reflexes. I know I should use their decimal system. So here's what you can't see, right? So in Studio A, what you can't see is that I'm wedged into a corner by the window in my bed with a wall slightly behind me. So that's going to change slightly, as you will see. Studio B, what you can't see is I am in we call it the basement. This was my grandmother's house. So this house someone in my family's been here, and not ages and ages. You know, we didn't settle here off the Mayflower, but you know, been here, I don't know, 50, 60 years. Or maybe no, wait, it's got to be longer than that. No. Oh, call it 60 some odd years. We call this the basement. It's not actually below ground. It's on ground level. But it's, other than that, it's essentially a basement. And when my dad, yep, I got Undaunted back there. When my father was a teen, he was a very good pool player. Back in a time when one could make a living on pool, which he started to do. He would play pool. He was a pool shark. He would go around and challenge guys to play pool. And it's funny hearing his stories when he's I don't know, junior, senior in high school, and he's got his brother, my uncle, was his wheelman, and they're driving around, and he actually at one point had hired a guy to drive him around. This is, I guess, is in the, oh man, what, mid 60s, I guess. And it's kind of the end of that age. If you've seen movies like The Hustler and things like that, there was a certain point in time where you could make a reasonable amount of money if you could play pool or do something or gamble well, or, you know, could be pool, which my dad did, you know, poker, whatever, but you could make a ton of money, a good amount of money, because you might be paying, you know, I don't know, like you could get a hotel room for like a couple of bucks or less, right? You go to a decent hotel and it's like a couple of bucks a night. not $300 a night. You might earn a couple $100 a night of pool, but you're paying for probably, you could spend days, you could live on $100. $100 could go really far, and you might make $300, $400, whatever, $100 in a night. So at some point, my dad used to practice in the basement of a church. Apparently, there was a basement of the church, had a pool table in it, and I don't know if it was a Catholic church or whatever, but the reverend or whatever, the person who controlled the church, I guess liked to play pool, and took a shine to my dad, or I don't know, somehow my dad ended up getting the guy's basement to practice pool. At some later point, he bought a pool table and he put it in the basement, and it is still here today. Now, it's all kind of warped. It's totally, it wasn't like an expensive pool table, when it was new, and certainly now it is kind of a wreck. Can't really play pool on it anymore. And at one point, we put a board on top of it when we were kids and started playing makeshift ping pong on the board on top of the pool table. So now I've put like a padding on top of the board on top of the pool table, and I've got a whole bunch of stuff on here, some of which I have to get more shelving and things to figure out what to do with. And I also have my computer, my monitors, whatever. Like, my dream scenario would be that I could kind of repurpose the pool table, or just get rid of the pool table and get kind of a gaming table, and then do stuff like I could do kind of overhead camera stuff here, and maybe I could just have gaming stuff here. Like, that's kind of a sort of a dream of mine to do. And the funny thing is, the pool table is just it's just unfortunately just in really bad shape, because a lot of what a gaming table is kind of a pool table already. You have a lot of pool gaming tables, right? They like to have the kind of almost bumpers with the sunken in surface, and the pool table's already got all that. It's got the felt. Anyhow, things for other days. But yeah, that is the story. Morning glory. Brian asked me, wonder if he ever came to Detroit. Big sports person? No, I don't think he ever came. Yeah, layers of years. Yes, different kinds of gaming, right? Pool to ping pong to tabletop gaming and virtual gaming. I don't think he ever went to Detroit. He tended to go like north. He never went. I don't think he ever went too far from. I'm in New England and Massachusetts, and he didn't stray too far away. He went up to Canada a little bit. He'd go down, like, this part of Massachusetts is kind of right on the edge of kind of Connecticut, New York. I think he went to kind of New Jersey, maybe a little bit, New York for sure, maybe Connecticut. Oh, Magna says you can 3D print gaming tables in components, and then you can disassemble the table and store it in a little box. That's interesting. The thing is, this table, I don't know if it would come apart. It's just kind of like, it's awkward to deal with, to move and stuff. So it's kind of like I either have to, and I'm not a crafts person. I wish I was like I had some of that crafts in me where I could sit there and say, oh, I could go and take this pool table and totally just get the tools and just take it and sort of reimagine it as this new thing, to give it a second life. But I think that such things are I have no skill. I have no skill in such things. Like, I kind of wish like I had some kind of a little bit of Adam Savage or something in where I could have like a project and just start putting bits together, and suddenly I've taken this old pool table and turned it into a gaming table. I mean, it's probably somebody could. Like, I imagine that actually might be an interesting thing. If you were someone who feels kind of handsy, go try to find like from a yard sale, or maybe a dump or wherever, place where people are putting, and see, like, there's probably are some old ass pool tables that no one's using, that aren't really good for pool anymore, that you could kind of put an extra, like maybe the wood is warped, so that the balls are not, but you can kind of fix a little bit of that, and you can do a little bit of work, and you would probably have a decent game. I mean, they're kind of the right size too. I mean, they're a little bit big, but certainly you could have a lot of people. I mean, you could have a lot of people around this pool table for gaming, and the height off the floor isn't bad. I don't know. Oh, this over here, Magnus said, I want to get one of those screen things. Yeah, it's fun. You can add little things to it. I just wanted something a little bit visual back there. I don't know. It's kind of fun. You could change those designs. I just found these Lord of the Ringsy kind of ones, fantasy ones, so I threw them on there. Redcap says you could likely level it out and make it work once the weight of the slate is out. You could stiffen up and refinish. Yeah, I mean, if I knew how to do any of that stuff, I might. I mean, the back of my mind is like, could I self-train myself to do it, or should I just jettison it? I mean, the flip side is that gaming tables are really pricey, so people spend a lot of money on gaming tables. So maybe it's something at some point I'll have to take this whole thing apart, like take my setup all down, move it all aside, and then kind of check it out. But that'd be awesome. Like, because like ideally, what I would do is I'd have a smaller computer table kind of somewhere else in the room. I mean, the room is not huge, and I'm kind of in the center of it. But I could find maybe a corner, stick my computer stuff in, and then have have this as kind of the gaming table. I don't know. It's or maybe do some kind of wheeled setup so that if I wanted to do something with the table, like for a video or just whatever, I could do that and then not have it. I don't know. It's unfortunate that I just don't have the skill or the time really to do it. Here's what Homer says: if only there was a website with videos where you can find a tutorial. I know. Hey, Drew. I'm well aware. I mean, I've watched some on YouTube, but I don't have the tools. And what's the guy saying? Ghostbusters. We had the tools. We had the talent. I do not have the tools. I do not have the talent. And I'll admit to being gun shy and having to pick up a bunch of the tools. Like, I think ultimately, even if I bought the tools to do this, it's probably still be less expensive than actually buying a real gaming, a manufactured gaming table, most likely. But I don't have the tools, I don't have the talent, and so there's a lot to unpack. I just, I was a city kid, city adult. I didn't have access to. I wasn't a place that had access to those stuff. I didn't have, like with cars. We didn't have cars growing up, or even until I was well into adulthood, didn't really have cars. I was really around cars, so I never had the environment where you got the car in the driveway and with your father or someone trying to work on it. Like, I never had that stuff, so I don't know diddly about cars. I know the bare minimum of cars. I just don't have that experience with them. And it's the same thing. I didn't have really the carpentry classes or things. I just didn't have access to it and just didn't develop it. Now, that's not to say that I can't do it in life now. I'm not one of those people that's like, well, I'll never learn another new thing in my life kind of deal. But it would take a pretty good investment on my part to get into it. Okay, let's see what else we got here. What else we got? I did find a few things on the internets. We can check out if no one's got anything on their mind. Yeah, Redcap says YouTube can teach you a lot. Oh yeah, for sure. Like I said, it's a combination, right? I need the tools, I need the time because I need to be here to do it, and I need to. It probably is doable. I wonder if someone's actually done it. I almost think that because I was thinking about this the other day, is given how closely the gaming table sort of template is to a pool table. I almost wonder if someone hasn't done something similar, but there's kind of like the stuff to do the conversion, whatever that is, and then there's the stuff to kind of fix what's wrong with the pool table and do things like felting, and there's a lot. Like, could I figure it out? Yeah. But, I'm not here all the time either. So how many days, like if I was going to be up here for an extended period of time too, day after day after day to work on it, that's another thing. I'm not here all the time. I'm here periodically. Hey, good stuff, Drew. Congrats on getting the book onto Exalted Funeral. And yeah, let me know. I'm sure you'll shoot it over in your Discord what your video is or when it goes out. The other day would have been a good day to read your book, but I didn't bring it with me, and I didn't think I would have had the time. And I'm on a different computer too, so I don't have some of my files. I need to get my cloud kind of stuff synced up so that when I'm on my laptop, I've got access more or less to most of my home stuff, because I don't right now. I mean, you guys are, I'm going to pull up a couple things that I got. Oh, wait, here we go. Mythic Mountains is going to cut me off. All right, what is this? Why would I say I prefer BX for something heavier or lighter? Why is that my sweet spot? I mean, to be honest, so the question is, Mythic Mouse asks, why is BX my sweet spot as opposed to something else? So I think it strikes a nice balance. Well, one, I think nostalgia enters into it. Okay, I've been staring at those books off and on, in for decades, right? So they just have an appeal. I think part of it, and it's curious because I think part of what I chase a little bit, I think, in my adult gaming is those fleeting, fragmentary memories of my youth experiences with the books. That might be what I am really, as much as I can get caught up in the minutia and I can enjoy digging into, and I love digging into things like, how many villages do you need to have a town around and all that stuff. I think if I really just boiled it all away, there's probably some connection to these just fleeting images of kind of like little fragments, memory fragments of playing kind of as a kid. And the first memories of those is kind of the BX stuff. And as I mentioned earlier, I don't know, you might not have been on or not at that time, but I don't think I have really any memories where I could say for sure that I played BX and not some amalgam of BX and AD&D and whatnot. Like I said, I probably did. There's probably some things where I went through a little bit of it, but a lot of my memories was kind of mixed. I don't have, and I think as I've gotten older, I feel like when Daniel and I were talking about this the last week, and I feel like he may be in a similar place. I think as I've gotten older, the crunch doesn't appeal to me as much anymore. I'm really kind of, I don't know if cognizant is the right word. I really fixate on what am I getting out of this crunch? Like what are turn segments doing for me? What are all these subsystems doing? And if I can make it simpler and still get most of it out of it, or if I look at it and say, it's not really delivering much, then I tend to now want to kind of say, like, I don't need it. I feel like in AD&D, looking back, I feel like you have to separate AD&D a little bit. There's the chassis. If you just take away all the subsystems and you look at the chassis is not very different than BX. It really is OD&D plus Greyhawk with a couple things here and there. That's AD&D, but that's that chassis of AD&D, and then on top of it, they layered on just a cajillion different subsystems. I think through answering stuff in the community, through wanting to build I would say it's trying to get things more uniform, right? If you look at the stuff that Gygax was writing in, say, the early to mid 70s after D&D came out, it was very much kind of a punk, do-it-yourself attitude. Man, it's your game. You take it. Your thing is as good as my thing. Let's just all make stuff. Rock on, right? When you get to AD&D, the approach is totally different. You read the forward over the AD&D, and it's no longer like do it yourself, rock on. It's do it this way. Do not listen to what you may have heard me say 7 or 8 years ago. Do this. And I think there are a lot of things at play there. I think a lot of people joke about, corporate Gygax taking over. I mean, it's inevitable. You make something that's making money. You want to kind of, people are telling you, well, how do you get to make money? Keep making money, make more money, and the kind of uniformity, protecting your brand, blah, 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 all this stuff. Want to get an Arneson out, get out. Even though it didn't work. But, all the stuff comes in, and so you end up with a kind of a totally different approach to the game. But especially, and as a kid, I think we tried all that stuff. It didn't matter. It felt, as a kid, I guess you must feel like you just have oodles of time. Like time barely exists as a kid, at least in individual days. It just feels like you have forever to do everything. Now as an adult, yes, Fluffy the Griffin says, ignore that Dave Arneson behind the curtain. Right, exactly. Now as an adult, though, time just seems to be super limited. And I don't want to spend half a session digging into whatever or getting caught in that, especially if it ends up not being that, not that useful. Oh, okay. It's 3 segments. All right. Did it make a big difference? No. Like, so why are we counting? And I'm not saying there aren't returns, there aren't reasons, and there are things, but I think you find, at least I find with laws, that there's that, that point of diminishing returns, and once you kind of hit that point, it's, you're just wondering, well, each one is little steps, and I think you look at the steps individually, they make a lot of sense. But when you start adding them all together and layering them on top of each other, it can just kind of be a bigger bear, maybe than you need. But certainly we internalized it back in the day, and I think you probably can internalize it now. But it's probably not. I like I just feel like I like simpler things. Like when you look at those tables that he would write up, where you're adding all these different percentages. Add 12% of it's this, add 7% of it's this, add 6% of this, add 21% of it's this, and I'm sure all that stuff makes sense. And you go, oh, this is, but I'm just give me +1 -1 +2 -2 out of 6 or out of 10 or out of 20, whatever, and just like let's call it a day. That little extra. Oh, what are we getting by computing it to 100%? What is that? What is that delivering for us? That are we losing much if we go from 1% resolution to 5% resolution? Right, going from a D100 to a D20. What are we losing there? And yeah, that 4% could be a big deal, but is it at the end of the day? Is it really a big deal if you tell somebody you got a 1 in 100 chance or you got to roll a 20? I don't know. Is it? Maybe not. And I tend to start to think like, it might not be. Rune says they think when you're young, you have a chip on your shoulder, and systems mastery gives you a sense of pride you don't need later as an adult. That might be. I don't really remember coming at it like that, but I could certainly see, right, that kind of, you see AD&D hits your door, and you're like, AD&D, I gotta get this. I'm advanced. I'm 12 or 11. I'm advanced. I'm gonna learn this advanced stuff. There's probably something to that, at least for some people. Fluffy Girl mentions tournament play. Yeah, I think they were trying to. I mean, they didn't really nail it until I guess kind of the 5e stuff, to the extent Adventures League. But I think that was always the thing. And I think and tournament play, I mean, there was Gen Con and those sorts of things that were happening, and I think that they probably envisioned something that we closer to kind of Adventures League that we have now, where you go to every city. And look, I get it, because it's not even perfect now, or at least it wasn't when I would read. I was more interested in reading about Adventures League with different GMs and their different kind of quirks and people complaining like, "Was this okay? I went to an Adventures League game and the DM did this. Was this unusual or it seemed weird to me?" Like, whatever. But this idea of being able to take your game or take your character and you travel from city to city and you go pick up a game, or you go to a store and pick up a game, or whatever, you go to a con and get it into a pickup game, and that you're kind of compatible in all ways, like the rules. You kind of know everything, and you can just take that, like kind of like a board game, really, right? If once you know how to play the board game, you can take that board game, or anytime someone's like, "Hey man, we're playing Ticket to Ride," and Ticket to Ride, then you're good. Play. You don't have to try to figure out like, how do they play Ticket to Ride, right? And maybe someone's got a little house rule here and there, but for the most part, you want to play Catan, you can play Catan anywhere. You can go and play Catan, and I could totally appreciate them wanting to bring that same kind of thing to D&D. Because it can get a little bit like crazy. Everyone sort of playing all their own style, and the idea of saying, "Hey, we want to have we want this as a real platform, and we want some kind of regularity, and we're going to do that through the rules. We're going to say no more to just everyone just doing their own thing. Let's all do it one way." Would have been nice if they could have had like two things, like, "Hey, do it this way or that way." And I know that you don't have to listen to books, and nobody did, right? Nobody stopped homebrewing stuff because Gygax suddenly said no in the preface to the DMG or the Player's Handbook, whichever one. But by the same token, I think it is important what you put in print. People will take it, right? People will read what you put in print and say, "Oh, I don't feel comfortable doing this because Gygax told me not to." So I think that kind of using your words to encourage people or discourage them, as the case may be, is powerful. Okay, so Mythic Mountain says, "I've been playing," talking about me, I have been playing LBL, the 3-round books, with plus Chainmail with Daniel. Has it brought any new perspective or important revelations that I bring into adventure gaming? Well, I think so. There's this interesting stuff. I don't know about adventure gaming. I mean, Daniel runs his games in a particular way, which I enjoy, and he runs his games in a very open, kind of sandboxy way. And it's often very funny because we'll change what we decide to do, or we'll decide to do one thing and we'll get kind of partway down it, and suddenly we're like, nope, we should probably go do this other thing, and we could do it. And he's able to be very flexible with that. There are some things like I'm not going to be able to remember a lot of the stuff is not really 3 brown books. It's more chainmail. Things like the combat does some interesting things. I like the troop combat. The only problem with the troop combat, and it's not a mistake about it, it's just because it's the way it is. It's troop combat. So you're sort of amalgamated as part of a troop. And in this case, we're not fighting with big units. We're not doing a skirmish battle necessarily, but just the party kind of becomes a group. And you kind of become one element, like a figure in that group. So you lose a little bit of that individuality just in terms of it's kind of how things kind of work a little bit. You're sort of you're kind of boiled down a little bit, but I don't mind it because the combats tend to be very fast, and the tactical choices, if you want to make them, are still there. But your individuality, let's say, you can feel a little bit less individual because it's just, I'm you're heavy foot, light foot. There's some of the stuff kind of like your things don't necessarily, a lot of stuff you just kind of boiling down to these kind of rough archetypes. I don't mind it. I don't mind it actually. I like it in some degree, but I could see that being like, if you're someone who wants to be more individual, then you might look at that and go like, I feel more like part of a blob than kind of like my own thing. The stages, right? The combat stages where you're running through saying, okay, missile, missile, and then, magic melee. I like that because it brings in, I mentioned at the beginning when we're talking about magic, in that in Daniel's, this kind of chainmail kind of combat system, you can be a magic user with some powerful spells. But if your target's in melee for a lot of those spells, you can no longer cast it. You cannot cast magic to melee. Of course, if you're in melee, you can't cast, anything at all. So as a magic user, you have to be really cognizant of sort of where you are on the battlefield, what your relation to the battlefield is, and how your spells interact with the battlefield. Because some things you can do that are still fairly powerful. The wizards in our party, the magic users, they like to use Phantasmal Force, and as long as they're not in melee, they can cast it and create an illusion outside the combat, essentially, so that they can still take advantage of that spell, and they're not directly they're not casting the spell into melee, right? They're casting it over to the side, and then maybe it comes into melee later. So that becomes a very powerful spell with a lot of utility because of that fact. But if you have Fireball, and you're not able to get Fireball off, I mean, there's a lot of times when you can't get those spells off. And of course, the other thing with like the bouncing back and how big the spaces are, right? We're very, very careful not to want to incinerate ourselves. But a lot of those spells you might think, okay, Fireball. Well, we can't Fireball because why? Because the front line's in melee, or we lost initiative, so they're going to move into melee and we're not going to cast it. So there's that nice kind of gamey bit to spells in terms of what you can manage to cast, how you can do that. That's a lot of fun, and fighters feel more powerful. Fighters feel pretty good. You got a lot of manpower, right? We're worth a lot of figures. I'm a 6th level fighter, so I'm worth 6 men. So we're doing troop combat. We're tearing a lot of things up, and in fantasy combat as well. You're kind of getting you feel powerful. And so that kind of combination of feeling powerful in melee in particular, and then knowing that magic users, if they're in melee, can't cast spells, you could see how you feel like there's this balance of, okay, wizard back there, yeah, you've got some spell you're trying to get on your fingertips, but you better hope I don't get to you, I don't do some kind of charging action or somehow get to you first, because once you get into melee, good luck. Let's see. Okay, so Mythic Mountain says, Oh, so his question is, what is the number one appendix end title to understand the Hex Press gameplay style of open exploration? Ooh, choices, consequences, if it could be one book. Oh, man, if I... Probably be Lord of the Rings, to be honest. It would, I mean, the reality is it would be some kind of weird maturge of like, you know, uh, like Excalibur plus Dragon Slayer plus Beastmaster plus Crawl, like kind of all that fancy 80s stuff. But I probably have to pick one. I would say Lord of the Rings, because it does. It's funny because I was listening to Jason's RPG Nerd Variety Cast where they were talking about the One Ring and kind of their experiences playing the One Ring. And I haven't really played the One Ring, so I really can't comment on it. But I really appreciate, when I look at the Lord of the Rings, I think it's a world that seems amazing. There's all kinds of stuff going on. The way the book kind of moves, they move through things. There's weird things they don't understand. You get Tom Bombadil, you got Old Man Willow, you've got the Balrog. That's just like all these things. Shelob, Gollum to a degree. The Ents, you got all these creatures there, and you also have this kind of really powerful, interesting, kind of overarching things that are happening. And that's probably what I always shoot to try to do. Like I'm not trying to do like a strictly narrative game, but I always love to have these kind of overarching elements that are happening. Like what is it? Like what is the kind of the theme of the world in a sense, or where you are? Like what is going on in this world? And maybe you interact with it, maybe you don't, but it's kind of happening, and you're kind of in that. The world is at war, and you're sort of in that kind of thing. And I always think of that kind of even if you're not playing the Lord of the Rings crew, Sauron, the smoke rises in the east and things are happening, and you kind of have this kind of vibe. Easy, easy answer. It's it's got like, but I mean, there's I read and reread all the the Conan stuff. I never really got into Game of Thrones. Elric I read, but it didn't. Not that it bounced off me, but I maybe didn't love it. And I think I always got annoyed by the comments I always read from Moorcock, where he seems to belittle Tolkien for like not everybody dying or anything, like, oh, nobody died. I don't know. There's some quote at least I remember being attributed to him about. I could probably look it up. Maybe it's even apocryphal. Moorcock criticizes Lord of the Rings. Oh. Let's see. Well, it's according to something or other. He criticizes Lord of the Rings for its politically conservative assumptions and its escapism. I mean, I don't even know that Tolkien would disagree with him about the escapism. Tolkien probably wouldn't disagree about both of them. It definitely has some conservative assumptions. But but there's a lot of stuff in there. But yeah, I think I always kind of think about Lord of the Rings a lot as sort of that first. I mean, all right, am I back? All right, sorry about that. I broke. Yeah, no, my mixer went to sleep. Yeah, like Moorcock's, Moorcock's fantasy books aren't about escapism. Like escapism is a bad thing. I think Tolkien wrote about how escapism he felt was a very valid thing. Politically conservative, yeah. I mean, there's that thing about. I mean, look, Tolkien was born in a very, very, very different time. So yeah, his things are different. His whole kind of collapse of how everything's kind of getting worse and worse over time, and industrialization was a mistake. Sure, sure. But let's not act like uh, that Moorcock's works are bulletproof and there's no seams there or there's no assumptions. Like everyone's got their assumptions they bake into it. But Elric's got some cool stuff, and D&D drew a lot of stuff from Elric and other authors. Okay. Well, I think we're so we've gone an hour, which is amazing. I thought for sure I'd have to dig into somewhere. Any last bits before we call the stream? Mythic Mountains, did I answer all your queries? Did I miss any from anybody else? Anybody else have any queries? So Drew had said that they wondered if crunch preference correlates with age demographics. I don't know. That would be interesting. I definitely think that you can be more... Because when you're older, you might not love crunch, but you're very used to the crunch you already have. So you're used to it, right? So you've been playing these whatever crunchy game for eons and eons, so it doesn't strike you as crunchy anymore. So you just kind of go with it. But then maybe picking up a newer crunch game would be more difficult. Yeah, I don't know. It just certainly feels like that just time. Let's see. Hold on. OAR number 6. Oh, this one. I haven't. I don't know if you can tell. It's still in the plastic. So I didn't. This one, and then Terrence, if you're still in here, I blame Terrence for this one. Terrence from Terrence gets blamed because he pointed out to me this was on sale at Amazon for some kind of ridiculously good price at the time, so I bought it, but I haven't actually opened it yet. I might get the Judges Guild ones. They seem like wonderful books. But the reason why I didn't kind of glom onto them more is I didn't feel like I needed it. Like, why do I need? Well, one, I think that and this is kind of the worst example. I don't think that the Temple of Elemental Evil is a very good campaign adventure. I think it's pretty bad, actually. So I don't know that it deserved getting some kind of deluxe treatment. Somehow that I don't know what people love about that game or that adventure. Temple. Now Hamlet has a lot of some fun stuff, and you get the campaign base, and you can kind of get your starting town, and the moat house is fun, right. But you get into the actual Temple of Elemental Evil bit, it's not good. And it's just really, it's kind of like I feel like it's a lot of the bad stuff. Well, T1, so Hamlet, so Mythic Mountains, I don't know if you know the kind of history, but the Temple of Elemental Evil was supposed to be a thing, right? Village of Hamlet into the Temple of Elemental Evil. It didn't work out that way. It ended up coming out several years later. It kind of it was supposed to be like a smooth thing. Oh, hey, Hamlet, and you're going to go into the temple, but they're kind of totally separate things. I don't know. I don't even know if whatever came out as Temple was really what they first imagined it to be. I don't even know the history. I suppose I could crack this open and read. I'm assuming there's a lot in here about the history, what happened to it. I'm sure it's interesting. But there was a big kind of time gap, fairly large time gap between when they finally managed to get Temple of Elemental Evil out, between that and Hamlet. So for a while, Hamlet was kind of hanging out there like a hanging Chad sort of thing. It's just kind of slifting in the Rin, and there was no, it was like, oh, you have Hamlet, and then there's nothing after it. Hamlet is a lot of fun. I have nothing really bad to say about Hamlet, and a lot of people, I mean, if you're going to play through it, then don't read it, read them. But a lot of people, there's a lot of fun stories of different things that people did with Hamlet, and just the way the town evolved in people's games, and Hamlet could be a base to kind of go really anywhere. Maybe you will end up doing connecting it up to the Temple of Elemental Evil as it was, that's how it was originally designed to. But you certainly don't have to, and it's pretty easy to kind of disconnect them, or when the bad guys are doing bad guy things, just kind of shift them to being headquartered somewhere else. If you are doing Temple of Elemental Evil, you know, good luck to you, because it's yeah. I mean, I'm not gonna really go through it because I don't even have great recollections of it, because I never really ran it myself. But it's there's some issues. Now maybe whoever's running the game has solved those issues, or because since you can read about all of them, you can amend them and try to fix them and do whatever. It doesn't seem to be kind of to me that when I think of if the juice is worth the squeeze of doing that, I would say it's not. But maybe he's got a brilliant idea. So, or he or she or whomever. Let's see. Mythic Mountain says that the classical crowd likes crunch, but for different reasons, and many adventure gamers enjoy less crunch. Yeah, yep. Well, that's why it's good that we have both, so that we don't have to all have the same crunch levels. Mage's Music says as they get older, they appreciate streamlined and type more and more. Yeah, I just feel like you just got, less time, less energy, and I think that kind of the act of gaming as opposed to doing the rules interfacing, you want to, I want to do as 100% gaming as close to that as possible. Things like trying to figure out rules and do mechanics and stuff, right? I want to be here. Game, like in-game kind of gaming time, and that as much down to zero as possible. And some sessions you might actually get close to that. You probably always have a little, there's always some, but that's kind of what I want to do. And with those light games, when you can internalize the mechanics very well, and not only you as the GM potentially, but you as a player or the rest of the party or the players, then you can really kind of get up there where you just kind of rolling with it, and that's kind of my goal. And if I am going to do crunch, I just want to make sure it's worth the time I'm spending, right? If I'm computing it well, I could be kind of gaming. Is it worth doing the rules interface? Like, what am I gaining out of it? Sometimes you get a lot of depth in things doing it. That's kind of how I feel sometimes about some of the hex crawling things and the resource things. It introduces stuff that impacts and creates more, interesting gaming situations. Then other times it's just like, well, I could have just given you a 85% chance, but we're going with a 81% chance, so we're going to use this other thing to do all that calculations, or I could have just roughly said 85%. And I think, probably just could have said 85%. One way or another, it's not that big a deal. Mage's Musings says they ran, Mage's Musings said that they ran Temple of Elemental Evil for their 2E group 15 years ago. The time in Hamlet was great. They rolled up to the temple and just noped out and went elsewhere. Yeah, I could definitely see that happening. It's probably for the best. Probably for the best. All right, I think I hear family members on approach. Any last things before I nope out of here and go figure out dinner arrangements? I am looking forward to the new ones. Like, they've got Dark Tower, and I guess they're going to be doing Caverns of Thracia. The only other thing with these, and it's just me, is if I own Keep on the Borderlands, I know they get all kinds of extra material, but I felt a little bit like I don't need Keep on the Borderlands for 5th edition. I wasn't gonna, I always kind of like, I'm not going to play this 5th edition. Even when I might have been playing 5e, I thought, like, I'm probably not going to run that. And then if I'm not running in 5th edition, I have the old stuff. So what do I need to buy? Spend, a bunch of money on a big, heavy book for what I already have. Well, you are welcome. Oh, thanks for the belated happy Father's Day. All right. Well, on those happy, kind notes, I'll bid everyone an adieu. Have a great rest of your day, night, whenever you end up watching or listening to this. Yes, the Jackay's verse will be really exciting to see. Yep, well, I'm looking forward to that. Have a great rest of your day, night, whenever you end up watching or listening to this. I will potentially be online tomorrow, but might not be because it's a kind of a cleanup, maintenance, and travel day. But we'll see. So if you don't hear from me tomorrow, then probably after that. Thursday's a tough day, so this might be an off week for me a bit, but I'll be back, whether you like it or not. But hopefully you like it. All right, folks, game on. Talk to you later. Bye now.